Hi, everyone. This is Samira Daswani, the host of the podcast, The Patient from Hell. Today, it is my complete honor to have Dr. Douglas Blayney join us as a guest here. He is an incredibly talented oncologist, incredibly impressive, by the way, when you hear about his many, many decades of work. But what I love most about Dr. Blayney is how much he cares about building tools, products, and services for patients. So, with that introduction, hi, Dr. Blayney. Welcome to our
Hi,
podcast.
hi, Samira. Thank you for that those kind words, and it's a pleasure to be here and spend some time with you and your listeners.
Thank you, Dr. Blayney. So, one of the things that we wanted to do today that may actually constitute the majority of our time is to debrief ASCO 2023. So you and I are familiar with ASCO, you far more intimately than anybody on our team, but maybe we can just start there. Can you talk to us a bit about ASCO? What is it? Why do we care?
Um, okay, great. Thank you. So, ASCO, which stands for the American Society of Clinical Oncology, was founded in 1964 and really focuses on clinicians or doctors mostly, but others who treat cancer. It is and has been the largest annual meeting or the largest scientific meeting focused on cancer patients, and the care of cancer patients. Uh, it has been held in Chicago for the since 2010. It turns out there are only three or four venues that can support a meeting that attracts 40,000 attendees. One of them is Las Vegas. Las Vegas isn't interested in a bunch of cancer doctors showing up and cutting into their other business. Orlando, Florida, is the second place that could accommodate. But for many reasons, Orlando isn't attractive to attendees that don't have little children or families to join them. And Chicago is the third. Chicago is a great city. It's a very cosmopolitan city, has a lot of attractions, and most importantly, is easy to get to, and has a major airport to get to not only from the United States, direct flights, but for the attendees from outside the United States. It turns out about a third of attendees, a third to a half, and usually it's about a third of attendees do come from non-US places, predominantly Europe, but more so China, India, as well as South America and Eastern Europe. So it has gradually, the ASCO annual meeting has gradually increased its presence and penetration uh, and importance in the world. In the last 10 or so years, it's been increasingly incorporating advocates or cancer patients who have an interest in advocacy. ASCO, as an organization, has gone out of its way, I think, to encourage this participation by advocates. The attendance fee, which covers much of the meeting costs, is very low or absent to advocates, so encouraging their participation. I, I will say that it's for me and for anybody who attends, uh, preparation is key. So, as a takeaway, first of all, if one is planning to attend, get hotel reservations and travel arrangements early. This year, for instance, there was a Taylor Swift concert on all 3 days of the annual meeting, which made it difficult to get around and also get flights and hotel reservations. But anyway, so that's one thing, is preparation logistically, and secondly is preparation more personally. The meeting is agenda is publicized. It typically starts on a Friday afternoon and goes until the following Tuesday morning. Much of the main activity is concentrated on Saturday and Sunday, but there's a great opportunity to connect with colleagues and friends and from around the world. So for your audience today, which I think is primarily non-professional, if one does want to attend, preparation is the key.
Totally
Re-
true.
Regarding ASCO, ASCO is again the American Society of Clinical Oncology. It has around 40,000 members, about half of whom are non-U.S. And ASCO has recently changed their dues structure. So oncology professionals from low and middle income countries do not pay membership dues, which is quite a break, I think, because I pay about $900 a year to be involved with ASCO, which does get me several journals. ASCO has sort of three main lines of business. One is the annual meeting, which we just talked about. Two is its journals. The flagship journal of clinical oncology is a peer-reviewed journal that comes in paper in the mailbox, but also in online. And then there are several other journals, including the Journal of Oncology Practice, Journal of Clinical Informatics, and Journal of Precision Oncology, that are available, some in print, and two of them available exclusively online. So again, the society is moving toward availability to the online community, and also trying to cheapen the dues for areas where it cannot be, where it isn't so affordable. So anyway, as I said, their three main businesses are annual meeting, the journal, and the third is professional advocacy. So advocacy for oncologists, as it started out, or cancer doctors who take care of patients, but it has become more broadly advocacy for the community, for those for the community of caregivers who help oncologists, including advanced practice practitioners, nurse practitioners, and physicians assistants, oncology pharmacists, and also people interested in cancer policy. So those are sort of the three main lines of business that ASCO has.
Dr. Blayney, can we talk a bit about or why is ASCO so important to the field of cancer medicine? Like, we have 40,000 people showing up across the world annually to Chicago, and I believe it keeps growing in terms of its global impact. So can you talk a bit about why is it such an important conference?
But yeah, so many people use ASCO as shorthand for the ASCO annual meeting. But again, ASCO is a professional society. But the ASCO annual meeting had, like everything, a few hiccups in the last few years, what with the COVID policies for isolation, et cetera. So this year was really the first year that ASCO met in person, and they purposefully included and continued the hybrid format. So one can sign on and hear the sessions in real time remotely. So, like many organizations, they're continuing with a hybrid format. ASCO annual meeting has a long tradition of having breakthrough therapies announced. Traditionally on Sunday afternoon, the highest impact scientific findings are announced in the plenary session, which this year had 4 abstracts featured. So maybe just Samira, stepping back a minute, what is an abstract?
Thank you.
So this year there were approximately, I think, 4,000 abstracts submitted. So so the meeting is in June, uh, right after the first of the year. Is a deadline for submitting abstracts. So, an abstract is a brief preliminary communication of scientific findings. Typically, they're structured that, in 4 sections. What's the purpose of this research that has been done? What are the methods? What are the results of the research? And what are the findings? And the potential impact on the field. So again, those 4,000 are submitted. There's a committee of domain experts, whether it's breast cancer or health services research or supportive care. Abstracts are categorized and then reviewed by the subcommittee of the scientific program committee, and then ranked as importance. So typically, for the plenary session, which is uh, the Sunday afternoon, nothing competes with this. Those potential high impact abstracts are presented. Usually, the program committee attempts to strike a balance among the abstracts that are presented. So this year there was a pediatric abstract that of relevance to the pediatric oncology field, and a couple, 2 or 3 about medical oncology. Then again, for attendees, there's also an effort to do tracks across the 4 days. So if one is interested in breast cancer, often there's a poster session where abstracts that are either very preliminary or very niche focused get presented as posters. A first author or somebody connected with the poster is standing by the poster, and it's much like a science fair. You get an opportunity to go by the poster, talk to the abstract presenter, ask questions, and really engage. And this year I had several collaborations that are resulting or starting and resulting from some of the poster presentations. At the
Dr. Blayney,
neck and oh, I'm sorry, Samir, go
no, no,
ahead.
no. Go ahead. I want to pause and like highlight something you said. So you have these like 4,000 abstracts that have come in. The program committee is in charge of this. Like honestly, it feels like a monumentous task of going from 4,000 down to 4 that get presented in this sort of incredible stage that is being watched globally. Can we first actually talk about how that presentation at plenary on the stage on Sunday afternoon results in changing medicine for oncology?
Well, let's take an example. Today, this year, there was a poster. I'm sorry, there was a plenary session abstract on ribociclib, which is relevant to breast used mainly in breast cancer now, but is starting to be explored in other disease states. The ribociclib abstract was presented by a relatively prominent, not a relatively, a real prominent person in the field, Dennis Slayman, who has a variety of accomplishments, presented a study which involved over 5,000 patients that were accrued and treated worldwide, and some of them with the ribociclib, and some of them with the endocrine therapy without ribociclib. And there was a 3% improvement, which met the pre-specified criteria for a positive outcome. Well, it turned out that 3% improvement in the breast cancer population that was picked meant the absolute number of survivors at 5 years went from something like 88 or 89% to 92%. And so, great. This met the study design. This was carefully reviewed with the FDA and other regulatory agencies. So now my guess is the sponsor, the manufacturer of ribociclib, is going to the FDA and say, look at this. We designed a big study, 5,000 patients. It cost us a lot of money. Well, they won't tell the FDA how much it costs, but the implication is, yeah, it cost a lot of money because there were 5,000 patients treated worldwide for 3 years of treatment. And now we should be able to market ribociclib for the indication of post surgical adjuvant treatment of breast cancer in combination with endocrine therapy.
Mm.
So again, that ribociclib is already marketed in this country. I'm not sure about its availability in European countries or other countries with more government-run healthcare systems, but this is to your question, Samira, about the impact. This is likely to impact this change the standard of care for post-surgical adjuvant treatment of hormone-positive breast cancer. So, having said that, just by way of background, and in the plenary session and other oral sessions, an expert is often tasked with putting the findings in context. So, as many of your listeners may know, the CD46K inhibitors include ribociclib, include abemaciclib, and also include palbociclib. So there are three competing agents in this space, all with similar mechanisms of action, and all with differing side effect profiles and perhaps differing efficacy. But anyway, this was pointed out in the discussant. Later, it came out in various forums that if you pick the control group, it is very difficult. Well, start again. So great. We have 3 of these drugs. All have been tested in a randomized clinical trial setting for adjuvant breast cancer treatment. Which one to choose? Which one is better, doctor, is the common question. Well, the answer, like a lot of things in medicine, is it depends. One of the things it depends on is trying to compare 3 different studies conducted in different study populations. It turns out that all 3 studies had differing criteria for patients eligible for the trial. So some patients are going to do, if you pick patients who are going to do great on endocrine therapy and adding a small benefit with the CD46K inhibitor, that benefit from the CD46K may be diluted out by the number of patients who are going to do well regardless of what endocrine therapy they get. So this is a classic example of how cross-study comparisons are fraught with hazard. My guess is that 2 of the drugs abemaciclib and ribociclib are roughly equivalent in this setting. But in my experience, some women and men, but mostly women, can't handle ribociclib because of the either cardiac or other toxicity. Some can't tolerate abemaciclib because of diarrhea and other toxicity. So it's good, I think, to have two choices which are roughly equivalent in efficacy, and maybe three if you throw in palbociclib, which may have a little, may either has less efficacy or because of the study design appears to have less efficacy, or the dosing regimen. So it's very difficult to do, and frankly not, I think, ethical to generalize across and compare studies. I think it's great that we have three drugs, again, that patients and their doctors and clinicians can make the choice. And yeah, so having said that, that's where I'll end that, I hope. But the
That
point
was
to really your question was, yes, the ASCO annual meeting sessions can move stock prices and move the market, and can move the market, and that's led to problems of its own. It's not so apparent from large pharma, which has a diverse portfolio of drugs, but for small drug companies, which have one drug, a negative ASCO presentation can decimate the stock price and consequently the ability of the company to survive and further develop the drug. Contrary-wise, a positive can really move the market, which leads to, gee whiz, if somebody knows this, can't they take advantage of this knowledge and trade with, and either buy or sell the stock based on that knowledge? Certainly they can. It's happened, so ASCO has an embargo policy. Anytime someone submits an abstract, they have to say, "I agree to hold its contents confidential, and not make public pronouncements." And if that happens, public pronouncement, I've seen the abstract withdrawn from the program. So again, it's hard for ASCO to make more punitive actions than that. But there are regulatory agencies in this country and elsewhere, I'm sure, particularly the Securities and Exchange Commission pays a lot of attention to the embargo policy. I'm sorry, I keep cutting you off, but one exception is the announcement by press release. So a company, once they have knowledge of a positive or negative result, the ASCO embargo policy allows them to say, "Wait a minute, we have knowledge here that could potentially move the market, and we're going to make a press release." And typically, that says, "We have a positive result from our study. Details will be presented at the ASCO annual meeting in June." And by the way, this is not unique to ASCO. This is by and large a policy that's followed by other organizations, including AACR, the San Antonio Group, etc. So maybe that's more than you wanted to know. But I in my 15 or 20-year career with ASCO, I've watched this develop, and it's been fascinating and something many people don't think about, but some do. And
No,
so
I
there you
actually,
have it.
I was gonna go there. I was actually gonna try and summarize because I think you said two very, very important things that I wanted to kind of emphasize. The first is the Sunday afternoon plenary session has almost a direct impact on the practice of medicine. It's a lag impact, I'm guessing, because the presentation doesn't mean that the drug is approved. It just means the data is out. And then there is a like after effect. And the after effect is maybe the pharma company going to the FDA or equivalent regulatory body to get approvals. The approvals then trigger change of presumably practice by clinicians who are, in this example, treating women or men with breast cancer. So there is this sort of like, I don't want to say snowball effect, but this like, it gets triggered at ASCO, that this kind of like chain effect happens. And that's clinical. And that largely speaking, and please correct me here, but largely speaking is in the benefit of the practice of medicine, including patients, right? Because presumably you're moving the field forward. It's giving you the cutting edge research, getting you cutting edge treatments, ensuring that information is being disseminated. There is the other side of it, though, which is the business side of it. ASCO is a business. The plenary session is showcasing, I'd imagine, mostly company sponsored research. So in this case, it's large pharma, small pharma, pharma sponsored research. I'm guessing the vast majority is that. And therefore, by those presentations, to your point, it's not just that the market is changing, the future of these businesses are changing. So ASCO has sort of a almost like a double side impact model where one is like direct clinical impact, and then the second is actually commercial business impact on the industry. And to your point, SEC is involved. It's being watched very carefully because the impact can be fairly large on the future of many companies. Is that a fair sort of summarization?
Yes, I think so, Samira. And it's a tough balance. Again, we and I think most clinicians and oncologists want to do the best for our patients. Having said that, we can't be everywhere and we can't know everything. So we do rely on other sources of information, or maybe secondary or tertiary sources of information about what went on at the ASCO meeting and other scientific meetings. Now, recently, it's become common that high impact uh, um, papers or results will be simultaneously published in high impact clinical journals. Two of the abstracts, I think, this year were published simultaneously in the New England Journal of Medicine. Other high impact abstracts were published in ASCO's own Journal of Clinical Oncology, like I mentioned before, as well as in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So I guess to your point, the how do we try and assure that all clinicians benefit from your from these high impact pharma sponsored, typically abstracts. I will point out one I think important exception to your pharma sponsored paradigm. Several years ago, one of the plenary session abstracts was a presentation showing that there was cancer patients had better survival if they were enrolled in a program of prospective symptom management. Ethan Bosch, one of our colleagues at the University of North Carolina, um, put together a randomized clinical trial of uh, usual care compared with a proactive outreach for symptom management from the cancer center, typically by telephone, showing that there was a improved survival of patients who were enrolled in the treatment arm with proactive outreach. So again, did this move the market? Well, there wasn't a marketed product. Did this influence practice? Well, maybe, but it's hard to implement a program of proactive outreach to patients. And even Dr. Bosch and his colleagues are Ethan does not struggle. He's very effective, but implementing this practice wide is really a heavy lift, and there are a lot of attempts to do implement similar strategies, and it's sort of like a tree falling in a forest. If nothing happens, nobody hears it. Did it really happen or not? Similarly, if someone is not hospitalized or their nausea is not treated, but it goes away spontaneously, it's hard to score a win
Yeah.
on that. So I guess coming around to yes, the plenary session does emphasize high impact research findings. And then there's oral abstracts, which I was getting to. If one is interested in breast cancer, one can follow all of the breast cancer abstracts from ranked sort of importance by the committee. So the poster session then about breast cancer does not overlap in time, that is, with the oral abstracts, and does not overlap in time with the plenary session. So if one has an interest in a particular cancer type, whether it's breast cancer, lung cancer, health services research, there's generally something going on throughout the time of the meeting. And all of those, to your point about, if it's a small, I don't want to say small, but if it's a relatively uncommon tumor type or situation, it may not rise to the level of importance of a plenary session, but an oral abstract can also, as well as a poster, can also be very impactful on that particular community.
I'm super glad you shared this level of detail. I honestly had underappreciated the complexity that ASCO as an organization has to deal with. I had absolutely underestimated the complexity on the business side of it. Because I'm guessing, and this is going to be another question from me to you, is I'm guessing that the committees at ASCO need to have some sort of independence from pharma sponsors in order to be able to choose which uh, abstracts rise to that kind of level of the planet. I can't say the word. The high impact abstracts, and the stratification there, I'm guessing, requires the committee to be relatively independent. So I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit more about what that selection process looks like and how ASCO is able to maintain integrity. Because ASCO, from my lens, it comes down to integrity. And I think one of the reasons ASCO is able to be such a prominent voice in the ecosystem is because of that integrity. And if you don't mind talking a bit more about that, that would be great.
Well, yes, thanks, Samira. Um, First of all, ASCO is largely is a volunteer professional society, with the exception of the elected officers, or actually the president and board chair, et cetera. So 3 or 4 elected officers and the journal editors. All other ASCO activities are essentially donated by interested parties. And part of the American tradition, as de Tocqueville pointed out in the early 1800s, is that there's this large tradition of volunteerism in our society, which is great and very satisfying, and which ASCO takes advantage of, and gives a very positive outlet for clinicians, doctors, and others, advocates who want to volunteer to make the world better. So, having said that, and encouraging volunteerism, to your point about, gee whiz, how do we deal, or how does ASCO deal with conflicts of interest. Um, Again, there's a tension here. If you're not, I come from the position that academic centers are very poor at developing marketable ideas. Academic centers and ASCO, actually, and other voluntary societies are great for developing ideas, but moving those ideas to where it impacts more than the patient across the table, exam table for me, is a very difficult endeavor. So, having said that, um, that's my background position. Um, Having said that, it's if you're, I think, if a commercial entity is not asking your position and reimbursing you for that time, you're probably not a leader and a thought leader in the field. So, having said that, that also raises the tension. How what is um, what is a legitimate ask for expertise, and and what is a payment for showing up and giving your opinion, which may or may not be listened to, but getting an honorarium at the end. So it's a hard tradition to follow, to not tradition, a hard tension, to resolve. So you may notice when somebody is starting a presentation at ASCO or other annual meetings, there's a mandatory slide that is presented. Usually it's glossed over by "these are my disclosures." Sometimes there can be 15 or 20 disclosures, and it takes a very sophisticated person and a fair amount of time to say, well, that 14th company that was listed on that slide in 8-point font is really conflicting this person and swaying their opinion, whereas all the other 18 listed is chaff. So how do you separate the wheat from the chaff is very difficult. It's mostly an honor system. It's mostly an honor system that typically, if someone has been an investigator on a trial, they will recuse themselves from ranking that trial's results. If somebody has been paid as a consultant by a company that on a different drug or area of expertise than that's the one that's at issue, often that's not viewed as a conflict, and that person will go forward. Again, it's and I guess the other thing to say is that there's this open payments system that is mandated by statute that the federal government keeps track, and anybody can look up their doctor and see how much money was directed their way by pharma companies. That there are a lot of loopholes in that. If I, for instance, at Stanford, ran a clinical trial, and that money went to Stanford to support the clinical trial personnel and maybe some of my salary, but not directly to me. That is supposed to be denoted separately on the open payments website. It's not always accurate. There's a process for disputing that, very involved. So there's that. And secondly, if a payment comes from a company that doesn't have a marketed drug, that payment does not have to be reported on open, whatever it is, the website. And thirdly, if I'm given a reprint, or if I'm given a reprint, that company has to report that, even though it's a trivial, $5 or $10, that has to be reported. So this, I guess where I'm going is that it's largely an honor system, but there is a fair amount of transparency involved. And I'm here to tell you that there are a lot of recusals, typically by the individual and not forced by the organization. But there are a lot of recusals in the scoring or evaluation of the abstracts.
Dr. Blayney, I really appreciate the depth of that. And I say that partly because of what my role is in this conversation, right? I am almost representing the patient. And it's one of the things that I think patients really struggle with, because I think trust today is hard. And the more you get into the space, the more you learn about the many, many incentives at play, the harder trust becomes, especially when it comes to what is the right treatment for me. And it becomes a question of how do we as patients navigate this rather complex system, especially if you're in treatment for many, many years and your treatments are changing and you're going to get the quote unquote latest care that may or may not be standard of care. So it becomes very complicated. And as patients get into it, I've heard so many times that one party or the other party is quote unquote evil, right? But the reality is, I think it's about the business of healthcare. And we've had a couple of episodes on our podcast where different people have come and spoken about the business of healthcare, because depending on your lens on the US healthcare system, it really is a business, right? Each of these organizations has a quote unquote bottom line, including our hospitals. Hospitals have to maintain profitability to be sustainable and provide care long term. So even hospitals are a business. Of course, pharma companies are a business, insurance companies are a business. And then somehow in the mix of all of these businesses, you have kind of the patient as a consumer, sort of a consumer, part consumer and part recipient of the many incentives. So I'm really glad that you kind of went into the depth of what integrity means, transparency, recusals when it comes to selecting abstracts. I really appreciate that. I am going to wrap part one of our episode at this juncture, but I know part two is going to focus on ASCO 2023, the theme of ASCO 23, annual meeting 2023. And what were the big learnings that are coming out of ASCO 2023 that happened in June 2023. I said that a lot. But at that point, if you're okay, I'm going to thank you for joining us today, and then we'll continue right on into part two.
Samira, thank you, and thank you for your audience for their attention this afternoon. Great fun.
This podcast, show notes, and newsletter is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medicine, nursing, or other professional healthcare services, including the giving of medical advice, and no doctor-patient relationship is formed. The use of information on this podcast or any materials linked from this blog is at the user's own risk. The content here is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions.